Leo lived in a small, quiet town where everyone seemed to know each other. His house was modest, with a little garden out front and a living room filled with sunlight in the morning. Leo's parents loved him dearly, and from the day he was born they noticed that he was a little different from other children. He was born with Down syndrome, and though his parents knew this, they never treated him as less than anyone else. They simply loved him the way he was. From a very young age, Leo had a fascination with sounds. Whenever his mother clapped her hands or tapped on the kitchen counter, he would giggle and try to copy the rhythm. He loved the way different objects made different noises, and he would spend hours banging on pots, pans, or even empty boxes to make music. His father would sometimes laugh as he watched Leo's tiny fingers drum on anything he could reach, and it was always accompanied by a cheerful hum from Leo himself. That hum, his father realized, was more than just a sound. It carried something unique and special. The house was often filled with laughter. Leo had a way of making everyone smile, even on days when nothing seemed funny. But the laughter wasn't always just happy. When he was at school, the other children would sometimes giggle at the way he moved, the way he spoke, or the way he played. It wasn't always unkind, but it made Leo feel shy and unsure of himself at times. Even then, he had one place where he felt completely safe: the old piano in the corner of the living room. It was an old instrument, a little out of tune, with chipped keys and faded black and white surfaces. But to Leo, it was a treasure. His mother would often find him sitting there for hours, his small hands pressed lightly on the keys, trying to make sense of the sounds. Sometimes he would simply press keys randomly, and at other times he would tap out a rhythm he had made up in his head. His father would sit nearby quietly watching, amazed at how focused and happy Leo was when he played. There was something magical about the way the music seemed to flow through him, even if it was just a few notes or an improvised tune. Seeing this, Leo's parents decided to do something important. They wanted him to learn to play properly, to understand the piano and explore his talent. They found a teacher named Ms. Clara, who had a reputation for working with children who needed extra care and attention. She had taught many kids over the years, and she knew how to be patient, kind, and encouraging. At first, she wasn't sure how much Leo could learn. She had taught many children, but each one was different, and Leo's Down syndrome meant he might face challenges that others did not. The first lesson was both exciting and a little difficult. Leo was nervous, his small hands hovering over the keys as he tried to remember what Ms. Clara had told him. She showed him simple scales and short songs, guiding his fingers and smiling whenever he got it right. Sometimes he made mistakes, sometimes he forgot, and sometimes he laughed at himself when the music didn't sound right. But he didn't give up. He was determined to play, and with each lesson he grew more confident. At home, Leo practiced every day. His parents never forced him, but they encouraged him to spend time at the piano. Sometimes his fingers stumbled on the keys, and sometimes the music sounded messy. But there was a rhythm in his heart that could not be taught. His parents noticed that when he played, he seemed to enter a different world, a world where nothing else mattered. The noises and distractions of the outside world faded away, and it was just him and the piano. At school, things were still not easy. The other children would sometimes stare or laugh, unsure how to react to someone who seemed different from them. Leo noticed, and at times he felt small, wishing he could just fit in. But he also had a quiet strength that he didn't fully understand yet. Every time he sat at the piano at home, he felt that strength grow. The piano was his sanctuary, his secret world where laughter and judgment didn't exist. His parents did their best to help him navigate both worlds. They taught him that people might laugh, sometimes out of misunderstanding, sometimes just because they were surprised. They reminded him that laughter did not define him, and that his gift, his music, was something that could touch hearts in a way that words could not. And slowly, Leo began to believe this too. As the months passed, his skills improved. Simple songs became longer pieces, and he started to play by ear, learning tunes just by listening to them once. Ms. Clara was amazed at his ability to remember melodies and even improvise small sections that made the music more beautiful. She knew that talent like this was rare, and she often told Leo's parents that he had a natural gift. But she also reminded them that nurturing it would require patience, practice, and above all, love. At home, family and neighbors started noticing a change too. Small gatherings at their house, which used to be just casual visits, became moments where Leo would sit at the piano and play for everyone. At first, people laughed at the unusual notes and funny rhythms, thinking of it as childlike entertainment. But as they listened longer, they began to hear something more, something beautiful and pure that could not be ignored. Even the laughter turned into smiles of admiration, as they realized that this small boy was creating music that carried emotion and life in a way that surprised everyone. Leo's confidence grew with each passing day. He began to understand that his music was a gift, something that could make people feel joy, wonder, and even calm their hearts. And as he played, he no longer worried so much about what others thought. Laughter at school became background noise, something he could hear but not let affect him. The piano was his voice, and through it, he could say things that words could never fully express. His parents watched all of this with pride and quiet amazement. They remembered the first day he had sat at the piano, hesitant and unsure, and compared it to the boy who now played with confidence, emotion, and courage. They knew that the road ahead would have challenges, and that the world could be unkind at times, but they also knew that Leo had something extraordinary inside him. And they believed that one day everyone else would see it too. Even in moments when he was tired or frustrated, Leo never gave up. Sometimes he would press a key wrong, or forget a note, or get distracted by a sound outside the window, but he would laugh, shake his head, and try again. It was this persistence, combined with his natural love for music, that made his talent blossom in a way that no one could have predicted. Leo's story was not just about learning to play the piano. It was about courage, patience, and the power of believing in oneself. Every day as he sat at that old, slightly out-of-tune piano, he was telling a story, not just with notes and rhythms, but with his heart. And though he did not yet know it, this story would one day reach far beyond his small home, touching lives in ways he could never imagine. And so, the laughter that once made him feel small became the music that made him strong. The quiet boy with Down syndrome, who some had doubted, was growing into a young musician whose passion and spirit could fill a room. The first part of Leo's journey was just beginning, but it was already filled with hope, warmth, and a magic that only comes from a heart that refuses to give up. After a few months of lessons, Leo's talent became more visible to everyone around him. What had started as simple tapping on the piano had grown into melodies that could make anyone stop and listen. His fingers, once small and unsure, now moved with confidence across the keys. Ms. Clara was amazed by his progress. She had taught many children, but few had the ability to feel music in such a natural and pure way. Leo didn't just play the notes. He played with his heart. Every sound seemed to carry a piece of his joy, his innocence, and his curiosity about the world. At school, things were still complicated. Some children didn't understand him and would sometimes giggle or whisper when he walked by. Others were simply curious and wanted to be near him, drawn to his energy and his laughter. Leo noticed these reactions, but instead of letting them discourage him, he focused on what made him happy. The piano became his anchor. Whenever he felt unsure or nervous, he thought about the keys under his fingers, the music flowing from his heart, and the way it made him feel strong and capable. His parents encouraged this mindset. They often reminded him that laughter or stares from others didn't define him. What matters, his mother would say, is what you feel when you play. That is your magic. His father would add, some people laugh because they are surprised, not because they mean harm. Don't let that stop you. These words slowly sank into Leo's heart. He began to understand that the world could be a mixture of confusion, joy, and surprise, and that he didn't need to fit into someone else's expectations to shine. At home, Leo's practice sessions became longer and more focused. He would start with simple scales, just as Ms. Clara taught him, and then move to small songs he had learned or composed himself. Sometimes he would play the same piece over and over, perfecting each note. Other times he would let his imagination guide him, improvising melodies that seemed to tell a story. His parents loved listening, sitting quietly in the corner, letting the music fill the room. They noticed how the atmosphere would change. The house, once just ordinary and quiet, now felt alive with emotion whenever Leo played. Ms. Clara began to introduce more complex pieces. She knew Leo could handle them, and she wanted to challenge him in ways that would make him grow. At first, the new music seemed difficult. Some of the notes were high and delicate, while others were deep and resonant. Some sections required quick movement while others demanded careful patience. Leo would frown in concentration, sometimes making mistakes or getting frustrated. But he never gave up. He had learned that persistence was part of the journey, and each mistake was simply a step toward improvement. When he mastered a piece, the joy on his face was unmistakable. He would clap his hands, laugh, and sometimes even spin around in excitement. It wasn't just about performing. It was about discovering what he could do and feeling proud of it. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, built his confidence. He began to believe that music was more than just notes. It was a way to express who he was, a way to tell the world, "This is me, and I have something beautiful to share." Outside the home, Leo's reputation started to grow slowly. Neighbors and friends would visit and ask to hear him play. At first, they came with curiosity, expecting something charming but perhaps not extraordinary. They might have laughed at the playful mistakes or the unusual rhythms he sometimes created, but soon that laughter changed. As they listened, they could hear the depth and emotion in his playing. It was no longer a child simply tapping on keys. It was music with feeling, music that could move people. People began to leave the house talking about the boy who played the piano with such passion. At school, some classmates began to see Leo differently. They still noticed his quirks, his unique ways of speaking and moving, but they also started to notice his talent. A group of children who once laughed at him now watched him with fascination. They were drawn not just to his music, but to his joy and determination. Leo, without fully realizing it, was teaching them an important lesson: that everyone has something special inside them, and that sometimes the greatest talents are hidden behind a shy smile or an unusual way of doing things. Leo's parents continued to support him in every way they could. They didn't pressure him to perform or compete, but they encouraged him to explore his abilities. They signed him up for small community events, talent shows, and music gatherings. Each experience was a learning opportunity. Sometimes he would feel nervous or shy, other times confident and bold. But through it all, he learned how to face new situations, how to focus on his music, and how to let his heart guide him. Music became not only a hobby, but a source of comfort and expression. Whenever Leo felt sad, frustrated, or anxious, he would sit at the piano and play. The music seemed to lift his spirits, calming him and giving him a sense of control over his world. It was his safe space, a place where he could be fully himself without judgment or expectation. And as he played, he began to notice that the music could also affect others. A neighbor who was having a bad day might pause and listen, a friend might smile, and even strangers who heard him play could feel something shift inside them. Leo's bond with Ms. Clara grew stronger as well. She became more than a teacher. She was a guide, a mentor, and sometimes a friend. She understood his strengths and his challenges, and she always encouraged him to take risks in his music. "Don't just play the notes," she would say. "Feel them. Let them tell a story. Let people hear what's inside you." Leo took this advice to heart. Slowly, his music became more expressive, more confident, and more moving. He started to play with dynamics, changing the loudness and softness, the speed and flow, so that each piece had life in it. One evening, after a particularly long practice, Leo's parents sat quietly in the living room, listening as he played a piece he had learned just that week. The music was delicate at first, soft and gentle. Then it grew stronger and more joyful, each note perfectly placed, each rhythm carefully shaped. When the last note faded, there was silence. And then his mother whispered, "He's extraordinary." His father nodded, tears in his eyes, realizing that what had started as a simple curiosity about sound had become something much greater, a true gift that could touch hearts. The small town began to take notice. People who had seen Leo at home or in school gatherings started sharing stories of the boy who could play piano so beautifully. Teachers mentioned him to other parents, neighbors spoke about him at markets, and friends invited him to perform at small events. While Leo remained humble, shy, and playful, the recognition he received began to grow. He was no longer just the boy with Down syndrome. He was the boy with a gift, a boy whose music could make people stop, listen, and feel. Even with the growing attention, Leo remained focused on the music itself. He didn't play for fame or praise. He played because it made him happy and because he wanted to share something beautiful with the world. His parents made sure he never lost that sense of joy. They reminded him that the applause, the praise, and the admiration were wonderful, But the true magic was in the music itself and in the feeling it created. At home, the piano continued to be a place of wonder. Each day, Leo explored new melodies, tried different rhythms, and even began to compose short pieces of his own. His creativity blossomed alongside his technical skills, and the music became more personal. Every note was a reflection of his personality, joyful, curious, innocent, and full of life. Ms. Clara encouraged this creativity, praising his imagination and helping him refine it into pieces that could be performed for others. Leo's journey was more than learning music. It was about growth, confidence, and resilience. Each day brought challenges, small victories, and moments of discovery. The laughter that once made him feel different was slowly replaced by admiration and wonder. People began to see him for who he truly was, a young boy full of life, talent, and the courage to shine despite any obstacles. And so, as the months passed, Leo continued to grow, not only as a musician but as a young boy learning about the world, learning about himself, and learning that joy, perseverance, and love could create something truly magical. Every key he pressed, every note he played, was a step toward a future filled with possibility, a future where he could show the world that he was capable of amazing things. The announcement of the upcoming community talent show brought both excitement and nerves to Leo's household. It was the first time anyone had suggested he perform in front of a large audience outside his family and neighbors. At first, Leo felt unsure. He had played for small groups before, but the thought of being on a stage with many people watching made his stomach flutter. His parents tried to reassure him gently. "You don't have to be perfect," his mother said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Just play from your heart, and that is enough." Leo spent the next few days preparing. He practiced the same piece over and over, learning the notes, memorizing the rhythms, and imagining how it would feel to play in front of people he didn't know. Ms. Clara guided him carefully, showing him how to start confidently and how to breathe when nerves crept in. "Remember," she said, "music is your friend. The audience is just another part of the room you already know. Let your music speak for you." Leo nodded, trying to take her words to heart. The day of the talent show arrived faster than anyone expected. The community center was buzzing with activity. Children practiced their lines, parents whispered encouragement, and volunteers checked that everything was ready. Leo's family arrived early, helping him find his seat backstage. His small hands felt slightly clammy as he clutched the sheet music, even though he had memorized the piece. He peeked through the curtains at the crowd and felt a mix of fear and excitement. People were chatting, laughing, and moving around, and Leo could hear some snickers, not unkind but curious. When it was finally his turn, the stage felt enormous. The lights were bright and the audience seemed to stretch endlessly. Leo's heart pounded, and for a moment he wished he could disappear. His parents gave him encouraging smiles from the front row, and Ms. Clara whispered, "You've got this. Just play, just be yourself." Taking a deep breath, Leo stepped forward and sat at the grand piano, letting his small hands rest gently on the keys. The first note he played was soft, almost hesitant, but as he continued, something incredible happened. His fingers, which had learned to dance across the keys at home, began to move with confidence. The music flowed from him naturally, carrying all of his emotions, the nervousness, the excitement, and most importantly, the joy he felt while playing. The audience fell silent, drawn into the melody. People who had come expecting just another child's performance suddenly realized they were witnessing something special. Leo played with such feeling that even the adults in the room could not help but lean forward, listening intently. The laughter that had been in the air before he began slowly faded, replaced by awe. Each note seemed to tell a story. Each chord resonated with honesty and beauty. His small hands moved gracefully, and the music swelled and softened at just the right moments. The boy who had once been laughed at for his quirks now commanded the attention of everyone present, not through words or gestures, but through the purity of his music. By the middle of his performance, some audience members were holding back tears. The music carried a depth that no one expected from such a young boy, especially one with Down syndrome. There was a sincerity in his playing that touched everyone's hearts. The story he told through the piano was one of courage, resilience, and joy, and it reached each listener in a different, yet equally powerful way. People who had been skeptical, who had doubted what he could achieve, now sat in quiet amazement. Leo's classmates, some of whom had laughed at him before, were now watching in wonder. They could see the effort, dedication, and talent that went into every note. The girl who often teased him was now biting her lip, unable to look away. The boy who sometimes mocked his small mistakes was sitting straight, eyes wide, completely focused on the music. Leo had unknowingly become a teacher that day, showing his peers that talent and passion could shine regardless of differences. When he reached the final notes of the piece, he let his hands hover above the keys for a moment, savoring the silence that followed. Then, as the last note lingered in the air, a wave of applause erupted. The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some people wiped their eyes, moved by the beauty of what they had just witnessed. Leo's cheeks turned pink and he looked toward his parents, who were smiling broadly, proud beyond words. Ms. Clara's eyes sparkled with tears of happiness, knowing that all the months of patience, practice, and encouragement had led to this magical moment. After the performance, people came forward to compliment him. Neighbors, teachers, and even strangers shared their admiration. "You played beautifully," one woman said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've never heard anything like that," a man added, smiling warmly. Leo nodded shyly, not fully understanding all the praise, but feeling proud and happy inside. His music had spoken for him, and that was more important than anything else. In the days following the talent show, the community's perception of Leo began to change. People no longer saw him only as the boy with Down syndrome. They saw a young musician with extraordinary talent. Stories of his performance spread quickly. Teachers mentioned him to other parents, neighbors told friends, and local shopkeepers brought it up to anyone who would listen. Leo's gift had touched many hearts, leaving a lasting impression on the town. Despite the attention, Leo remained humble and playful. He continued to practice at home, exploring new melodies and enjoying the process as much as the performance. His parents encouraged him to keep learning and growing, but they also reminded him that the joy of music was not in the applause, but in the feeling it created. And Leo understood this more than ever. The stage, the audience, and the recognition were wonderful, but the true magic was always in the music itself. Ms. Clara continued to guide him, introducing slightly more challenging pieces and helping him develop his technique. She also encouraged him to experiment, to improvise, and to let his personality shine through his music. Leo's confidence grew even more, not just as a musician, but as a young boy learning that he could overcome fear, face challenges, and inspire others along the way. At school, the shift in how people treated him was noticeable. Children who had once laughed now approached him with curiosity and respect. Some asked him to play for small classroom events or for friends who were feeling sad. Leo's presence became a reminder that differences were not weaknesses, but opportunities to learn and appreciate the unique qualities each person carries. He was becoming a source of inspiration without even trying, simply by being himself and following his passion. Leo's parents reflected often on the journey that had brought them here. They remembered the early days, when he had been shy and unsure, when the other children's laughter had sometimes made him retreat. They remembered the long hours at the piano, the patience required from Ms. Clara, and the gentle encouragement they had given him. And now, watching him grow, perform, and touch lives, they realized how far he had come. It wasn't just about talent. It was about resilience, love, and the courage to pursue what makes your heart sing. In the weeks after the talent show, Leo's music began to reach beyond the town. Friends of friends invited him to play at small gatherings. Local businesses requested performances for events, and even teachers from nearby schools wanted to showcase his talent. Though he remained shy, he began to understand that his music had the power to connect with people in ways that words could not. Each new audience brought a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but Leo's heart always guided him. The piano was his friend, and together they told stories that could touch anyone who listened. Through all of this, Leo never lost the joy that had drawn people to him in the first place. He still laughed when he made mistakes, he still hummed while exploring new melodies, and he still found wonder in the small, simple things. His parents, proud and amazed, often reminded him of how far he had come, but also encouraged him to keep discovering, learning, and growing. Music had become more than a skill. It had become a part of who he was, a language through which he could express emotions too deep for words. And so, the boy who had once faced laughter and doubt had transformed that laughter into admiration. Through courage, persistence, and the simple love of music, he had amazed everyone who listened. The talent show was not just a performance. It was a moment that marked the beginning of something greater. It showed Leo that he could face fear, that he could shine in his own way, and that music had the power to change how people see the world and how they see him. From that day forward, Leo continued to grow, practice, and explore, always guided by his heart and the joy that music brought him. The applause, the recognition, and the admiration were welcome, but he never forgot that the true reward was in the music itself, in the way it allowed him to be fully himself, and in the way it could bring warmth, hope, and inspiration to everyone who heard it. After the talent show, life for Leo changed in ways he never expected. People in the community began to recognize him wherever he went. Teachers, neighbors, and friends of friends would smile and nod, sometimes asking him to play a little tune on the spot. Leo, though still shy at times, learned to handle the attention with quiet confidence. The laughter that had once followed him at school slowly transformed into curiosity and admiration. Children who had once teased him were now asking questions about the piano and the songs he played. At school, things began to feel different. The teachers started giving him more opportunities to perform in small assemblies and during classroom events. His classmates began to see him in a new light. Some would ask for his help learning rhythms, while others would simply watch him with wonder. Leo had become someone who could inspire others just by being himself. He didn't need to speak much. His music spoke for him. Even with all the recognition, Leo remained the same joyful, curious boy he had always been. He still laughed at silly mistakes, still hummed while experimenting with new melodies, and still found excitement in discovering new notes on the piano. His parents were careful to remind him that it was important to stay grounded. "You are special," his father said, "but being kind, patient, and humble is what truly matters." His mother often added, "Your music is a gift, and gifts are meant to be shared, but never forget where your happiness comes from." Leo took their words to heart. At home, he practiced diligently, exploring new pieces and learning more challenging songs. Ms. Clara continued to guide him, introducing techniques that helped him play more expressively. She encouraged him to experiment with speed, volume, and rhythm so that each performance had life and feeling. "Music is not just about hitting the right keys," she would say. "It's about telling a story with your heart. Every note should have meaning." One afternoon, Leo was practicing a particularly difficult piece. His fingers stumbled over the fast notes and he sighed in frustration, but he didn't give up. He pressed the keys again and again, listening carefully to the sounds and imagining the emotions he wanted to convey. His mother watched quietly from the doorway, smiling. She remembered the first days when he had struggled to play simple scales, and now here he was, tackling pieces that would challenge older students. It was a moment of pride and amazement that she would never forget. Word of Leo's talent continued to spread beyond their small town. Local newspapers and community blogs shared stories about the young boy with Down syndrome, whose piano performances had captivated everyone. Some parents brought their own children to see him play, hoping to inspire them with Leo's courage and determination. While he remained humble, Leo began to understand that his music had the power to reach people he had never met, to touch hearts, and to make a difference in ways he had never imagined. The community's perception of him shifted even further when he was invited to play at a charity event organized to raise funds for children with disabilities. Leo's parents were hesitant at first, worried about the pressure and the crowd, but Ms. Clara reassured them. "He is ready," she said. "He knows the music. He knows his heart. Let him share it with others." On the day of the event, Leo walked onto the stage with a quiet determination. The room was filled with people, many of whom had never met him before. Some whispered among themselves, curious about what to expect, while others smiled encouragingly. Leo's performance began softly, almost cautiously, but as he grew more comfortable, His fingers danced across the keys with elegance and emotion. The audience, initially quiet and attentive, gradually became absorbed in the music. Adults and children alike were drawn to the sincerity in each note, the beauty in every chord. For a moment, the world outside the room seemed to disappear, leaving only Leo, the piano, and the story he was telling through his music. When the last note faded, there was a moment of silence. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted into applause. Some people cheered loudly, others wiped tears from their eyes, and many simply smiled, moved by what they had just witnessed. Leo looked at the audience, surprised by the response, and then glanced toward his parents. Their faces were glowing with pride and love. He realized in that moment that his music had the power to connect with people, to make them feel something deep and real. After the event, several families approached him, thanking him for sharing his talent. Children who had been struggling with shyness or fear told him that watching him play gave them courage. Adults spoke about how inspiring it was to see a young boy with Down syndrome perform with such skill and emotion. Leo didn't fully understand all the words, but he felt their meaning. He had discovered that his music could touch lives, and that realization filled him with both joy and a sense of responsibility. At home, the experience sparked new motivation. Leo wanted to learn even more, to explore different styles of music and to play pieces that challenged him. He began experimenting with compositions of his own, creating small melodies that expressed his thoughts and feelings. Ms. Clara encouraged this creativity, helping him refine his ideas into pieces that could be shared with others. Every day became a journey of discovery, filled with notes, rhythms, and emotions waiting to be explored. Leo's parents noticed another change in him as well. He had become more confident in social situations. Though he still enjoyed quiet moments alone at the piano, he was now able to speak to groups of people with ease. He could smile and answer questions even when attention was focused on him. The piano had given him a voice beyond words, but it had also helped him grow as a person, teaching him courage, patience, and self-expression. Back at school, the respect from his peers continued to grow. Children who had once laughed at his quirks now invited him to join activities or asked him to play music for special occasions. Teachers began highlighting his progress in meetings, using his story as an example of determination and talent. Leo had become a symbol of inspiration, not because he was different, but because he had worked hard, followed his passion, and shared his gift with the world. Through all these experiences, Leo remained grounded by the love and guidance of his parents. They never let him forget that music was about joy, not just recognition. They encouraged him to explore, to make mistakes, and to play with feeling. They reminded him that every note he played was part of his journey, and that the journey itself was as important as any applause or praise he received. One evening, after a long day of practice and preparation for another performance, Leo sat quietly at the piano. His mother joined him, watching as he played a simple melody he had composed earlier that week. The notes were gentle, flowing like water, and the emotion behind each one was clear. She realized that the music had become more than just a skill. It had become a language through which Leo expressed his thoughts, feelings, and dreams. "Your music touches people," she said softly. "It's more than talent. It's your heart." Leo looked up, a small smile on his face, understanding more than his words could express. He realized that music had given him a way to connect with others, to inspire, and to share a part of himself that could not be captured in any other way. In the weeks that followed, Leo continued to perform at community events, school functions, and small gatherings. Each performance was a new experience, a new opportunity to grow, and a new chance to share his gift. People who had once doubted him or laughed at him were now among his biggest supporters. The boy who had once faced misunderstanding and ridicule had become someone who could change hearts and minds simply by sitting at a piano and playing. As his reputation grew, Leo never lost sight of what mattered most. He continued to practice daily, exploring new melodies, learning new techniques, and experimenting with his own compositions. His joy for music remained the guiding force in his life. The recognition, applause, and admiration were welcome, but they were secondary to the feeling of creating something beautiful, something that could bring warmth and hope to others. And so Leo's journey continued, filled with music, discovery, and growth. The boy who had once been laughed at was now admired, not for his differences, but for his courage, talent, and heart. Each performance, each melody, and each note he played reminded everyone who listened that true ability cannot be measured by appearances, labels, or expectations. It is felt, experienced, and shared with love and dedication. Leo's story had become more than just about music. It was about resilience, hope, and the power of believing in oneself. It was about the way one person, through passion and determination, could touch the lives of many. And though there were still challenges ahead, Leo knew that with his piano, his heart, and the support of those who loved him, he could continue to amaze, inspire, and bring joy to the world. As time passed, Leo's love for music grew stronger every day. The piano had become more than just an instrument. It was a part of him, a companion that helped him express emotions that words could not. Every morning he would sit at the keys, letting the melodies flow freely, and each evening he would play for his family, sharing the little stories that his music told. His parents watched him with pride, amazed at how far he had come, and grateful for the joy and inspiration he brought into their lives. Leo's performances had begun to attract attention from beyond the town. Invitations came from nearby schools, community centers, and local events. People wanted to hear the boy whose piano playing had captured hearts. Even though he was still young and shy, Leo's confidence grew with each performance. He learned to see the audience not as a crowd of strangers, but as friends who had come to listen and share in the music. The nerves were still there at first, but he found that once his fingers touched the keys, the music carried him through. Every new performance was a challenge and an opportunity. Leo began experimenting with different styles of music. He played classical pieces with precision, explored the joyful rhythms of folk tunes, and even tried creating his own compositions. Ms. Clara encouraged him to keep exploring, to let his imagination guide him, and to never be afraid of making mistakes. Music is about freedom, she would say. It's about telling a story, feeling it, and letting others feel it too. Leo embraced this advice, discovering that the music he created could evoke feelings in people that he could not have imagined. His parents noticed that music had also changed other parts of his life. Leo had grown more confident in social situations and more willing to try new things. Where he had once hesitated to speak or participate, he now shared ideas, laughed freely, and connected with others through both conversation and music. The piano had given him a voice, but it had also helped him develop courage and resilience that reached far beyond the keys. At school, his influence was noticeable. Teachers often mentioned his performances to other students, using Leo's story as an example of determination, talent, and the power of following one's passion. Children who had once laughed at him now looked up to him, and many were inspired to pursue their own hobbies and interests with more dedication. Leo had become a quiet leader, showing by example that differences were not obstacles but opportunities to grow and shine. One day, Leo's school organized a special assembly to honor students who had made a positive impact in the community. When it was Leo's turn, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Stepping onto the stage, he saw familiar faces in the audience. Friends, teachers, parents, and neighbors who had followed his journey. He sat at the piano and began to play. The music started softly, then grew in confidence and beauty. Every note carried the story of his journey, of the laughter, the challenges, the practice, and the joy he had discovered through music. The audience listened in awe, completely absorbed by the performance. Some people were moved to tears while others smiled broadly, feeling the energy and emotion in each chord. Leo played with a sense of freedom, letting his heart guide him rather than worrying about perfection. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause. It was not just for the music, but for the courage, determination, and spirit that Leo embodied. In that moment, he realized how much he had grown, and how much he could inspire others simply by being himself and sharing his gift. After the assembly, Leo was approached by students and teachers alike. They wanted to learn how he practiced, how he overcame challenges, and how he stayed so positive despite the difficulties he had faced. Leo shared what he could, smiling shyly while his parents stood nearby, quietly proud. The boy who had once been laughed at for his differences was now admired, not for what he looked like or how he spoke, but for the talent, perseverance, and heart he showed through his music. Leo's music began to reach even further. Local radio stations and small community programs invited him to perform. Some people traveled from nearby towns just to hear him play. Even though the attention was growing, Leo remained grounded. He understood that the music itself was the most important part, not the recognition. The applause and praise were wonderful, but the true reward was in the connection he created with every listener. The music carried emotions, hope, and joy. That went beyond words, and Leo reveled in the magic of that experience. At home, Leo continued to explore and create. He composed short melodies that reflected his feelings, his observations, and his dreams. His parents encouraged him, reminding him that the process of creating was just as valuable as performing. Ms. Clara worked with him to develop his compositions, teaching him how to structure them and express his ideas clearly through the piano. Together, they discovered that his imagination was limitless, and that every new piece could tell a story in its own unique way. Leo's story also inspired other children with disabilities. Parents and teachers would bring them to see him perform, hoping that they too would see that limitations do not define potential. Children watched Leo play and realized that their own differences did not mean they could not achieve greatness. Leo became a symbol of hope, showing that dedication, love, and passion could overcome obstacles and bring joy to oneself and others. Despite all the attention and admiration, Leo never lost his joy for simple moments. He laughed at small mistakes, hummed while exploring new melodies, and enjoyed every opportunity to play for family and friends. His parents cherished these moments, understanding that the heart of his music was in these small personal experiences. The talent shows, performances, and recognition were important, but the true magic was in the everyday connection he had with music. One quiet evening, Leo sat at the piano alone in the living room. The sunlight was soft, filtering through the windows, and the house was peaceful. He began to play a melody he had recently composed. It was gentle, flowing, and filled with emotion. Each note reflected his journey, the challenges he had faced, the laughter he had experienced, and the joy he felt in discovering his own abilities. The music seemed to fill the entire house, and even his parents, sitting quietly nearby, felt the emotion in every chord. In that moment, Leo realized that music had become more than a talent. It was his voice, his expression, and his way of connecting with the world. It had given him confidence, courage, and a sense of purpose. It had allowed him to inspire others, change perceptions, and bring joy and hope to everyone who heard him. And though he was still young, he knew that his journey was just beginning. There were new pieces to learn, new melodies to create, and new audiences to touch. Leo's story had become a lesson for everyone who knew him. It showed that laughter, misunderstanding, and doubt could be transformed into admiration, inspiration, and love. It proved that talent and determination are not limited by age, appearance, or ability. Most importantly, it reminded people that the joy of pursuing something you love and sharing it with others is a gift that can never be taken away. Even as he grew older, Leo continued to explore music with the same curiosity and passion that had defined his earliest days at the piano. He never lost the innocence, joy, and creativity that made his music so special. Every time he sat at the keys, he discovered something new, not just about music, but about himself, about life, and about the way one person's passion can touch countless hearts. His parents, proud and grateful, often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the early days of hesitant tapping on the piano keys to the performances that amazed audiences, Leo had grown into a young musician who could inspire and move people in ways they had never imagined. They realized that the most important thing was not just the applause or recognition, but the happiness and confidence that Leo had discovered in himself. Leo's journey had also left a lasting impact on his community. People spoke of him as an example of perseverance and courage, and his story became a source of hope for families with children facing challenges. Teachers used his example to teach lessons about patience, understanding, and the importance of nurturing each child's talents. Children who had once doubted themselves began to see that they too could achieve remarkable things if they followed their passion. As Leo continued to play, compose, and share his music, he remained the same joyful, curious boy he had always been. He laughed, explored, and created with the same enthusiasm, never letting fame or recognition change the essence of who he was. His story became more than just a tale of musical talent. It became a story of heart, courage, and the power of believing in oneself. In the end, Leo's life was a testament to the beauty of persistence, love, and creativity. The boy who had once been laughed at for being different had amazed the world with his piano performances. But more importantly, he had shown that the greatest achievements come from following your heart, embracing your uniqueness, and sharing your gift with others. Through music, Leo had touched countless lives, bringing joy, hope, and inspiration wherever he went. And so, Leo sat at his piano, smiling as his fingers danced across the keys. The room filled with melodies, and in each note there was a story of courage, laughter, and love. He knew that his journey was far from over, that there were still many pieces to play and many hearts to touch. But he also knew that no matter where life took him, the piano would always be there, and through it he could continue to share his heart with the world.